While Putin believed his new Oreshnik missiles would finally silence Kiev, something unthinkable happened in the last 48 hours. Moscow's multi-billion-dollar air defense shield just went dark. As a new swarm of Ukrainian silent predators bypassed the Kremlin's electronic shield to bring the war home to the heart of Russia, one has to wonder, at what point does a superpower realize it is no longer being protected, but targeted? Today, at MRwarfare, let's expose the moment Russia's capital became defenseless, marking the exact moment Putin's iron fortress turned into a glass house. We are diving into the zero-day mechanism that paralyzed the Russian high command for the first time since the war began. The elite are packing their bags in total darkness. The fundamental error in the Kremlin's January 10th doctrine was the belief that offensive escalation would create a strategic pause. It was a classic miscalculation. Under the cover of the Oreshnik's atmospheric disturbance, Ukraine launched a surgical dislocation that ignored the impenetrable airspace of the Moscow Oblast entirely. To understand how Moscow's heart was breached, we have to look at the engineering of the silent predators, a fleet that has rendered traditional electronic warfare obsolete. For years, the Kremlin relied on the Krasukha 4 and Pol 2-1 systems to create a massive GPS-denied bubble around the capital. Any drone entering this zone would lose its navigation and crash. But the 48-hour collapse proved that Ukraine has moved beyond satellites. These new drones utilize edge processing computer vision. Instead of waiting for a GPS signal from space, the drone's onboard AI processes real-time video feeds against a preloaded, high-resolution 3D map of the Russian landscape. It recognizes the specific curve of the Moskva River, the height of the Ostankino Tower, and the geometry of the MKAD highway. By the time the Russian EW systems tried to jam the drones, there was nothing to jam. The drones were flying by sight, completely autonomous, and electronically silent. Furthermore, the airframes are coated in a newly developed carbon fiber composite that absorbs X-band radar waves rather than reflecting them. This reduced the radar cross-section of a 2-meter drone to that of a small bird. When the S-400 batteries finally detected the swarm, the drones were already under the radar horizon, moving at 140 knots, just meters above the rooftops of Moscow's suburbs. While the drones were physically entering the airspace, a simultaneous zero-day cyber strike hit the heart of Russia's state power holding, Rossetti. This was the moment the coordination became clear. At 3 a.m. Moscow time, as the drones approached their targets, the automated cooling systems of 3 major substations in the Moscow Oblast were remotely deactivated. This was not a random hack. It was a synchronized blind spot creation. As the transformers began to overheat, the Russian military's priority shifted to preventing a regional blackout. Engineers and security focus were pulled away from the incoming kinetic threat. The Ukrainian drone fleet then targeted the auxiliary power units of the very air defense radars meant to protect the city. By hitting the power source rather than the radar dish itself, Ukraine achieved a soft kill. The radars stayed intact, but they had no power to scan the skies. In a matter of 48 hours, Moscow's defense ring did not just fail. It was systematically unplugged. We are looking at a level of multi-domain warfare, where the kinetic and the digital are so perfectly aligned that the defender is paralyzed before the first explosion even occurs. The Kremlin's command and control center was left staring at empty screens while the silent predators hovered over their primary targets. The physical breach of Moscow's airspace triggered an immediate and violent psychological fragmentation within the Russian high command. As the silent predators loitered over the city's primary energy nodes, the Kremlin's internal security protocol, known as Zaslon, was inadvertently activated. This caused a total communication blackout between the Ministry of Defense and the FSB. This vacuum of information led to the most significant capital flight since the 1,990 seconds. At Vnukovo 3, the exclusive terminal for Russia's business elite, transponder data captured a frantic 6-hour window. 14 ultra-long-range private jets, owned by the very billionaires who bankroll the state, requested immediate departure slots toward Dubai and Istanbul. This was not a scheduled exit. It was a panicked evacuation. For the first time, the men who control Russia's industrial base realized that the strategic depth of their country had evaporated. The collapse moved from the corridors of power into the financial nervous system. Inside Moscow's city district, the internal bank exchange rates began to decouple from official Central Bank of Russia reports. While the state-controlled media claimed the ruble was stable, the shadow market rate for physical US dollars surged by 40% in a single afternoon. When the elite flee and the currency de facto collapses in the same 48-hour window, the social contract between the Kremlin and the oligarchs is effectively nullified. While the sky over Moscow was falling, the true irreversible consequence was unfolding 1,000 kilometers away, in the rail yards of the Volgograd and Samara regions. For over a century, the Russian military has been a railway army, a doctrine that relies on moving 66,000 flatbed railcars across a massive geography. But a railway army cannot move without lubricants, and it cannot fight without diesel. In the last 48 hours, Ukraine's silent predators did not just target buildings. They targeted the Zhutovska oil depot and the infrastructure of the Samara refinery group. By January 10, the data confirms a catastrophic logistical disconnect. Over 40% of daily oil shipments are now being rejected by Russian railways because the loading racks themselves have been incinerated. The ripple effect is paralyzed supply lines. In the occupied territories, fuel trains intended for the Dnipro grouping have been turned into sitting ducks, easily picked off because they simply ran out of track to hide on. This is the logistical strangling of the Russian state. When the diesel runs dry in the domestic market, the tractors stop, the trucks stop, and most critically, the ammunition trains stop 50 kilometers from the front. Russia is not just losing its security in Moscow. It is losing the mechanical ability to sustain its empire. As the drones approach the MKAD, Moscow's massive ring road, the Kremlin's elite electronic warfare unit, the 15th Brigade, attempted to activate the Aegis protocol. But when they flipped the switch, something went wrong. The Russian sensors did not see one swarm. They saw thousands. Ukraine was not just sending physical drones. They were deploying electronic ghosts. Using miniature signal emitters, each physical drone projected dozens of false radar returns. For Russian air defense operators, their screens suddenly looked like a swarm of locusts covering the entire sky. This is the ultimate dopamine hit for a tactical planner. The moment you realize your enemy is not just faster, but has hacked your very perception of reality. While operators frantically tried to distinguish the ghosts from the killers, the actual silent predators were already hovering over the Luch power substation. In those 48 hours, the Kremlin was not just blinded. They were gaslit by their own technology. Imagine the scene. You are a high-ranking official in Moscow. You hear the sirens. You see the drones on your balcony. You check your banking app only to find your life savings locked for national security reasons. During this 48-hour collapse, we witnessed a zero-day event in the financial sector. At exactly the moment the drones breached the city limits, major banks like Sberbank and VTB effectively stopped trading foreign currency. By hitting the infrastructure of the bank's server farms in the Moscow suburbs, Ukraine did not just stop the tanks, they stopped the payroll. When soldiers at the front find out their families back home cannot buy bread because the digital ruble has frozen, the war ends. This is how you lose a city without losing a single soldier in a street fight. But the most terrifying detail is not what we can see on satellite imagery. It is the silence coming from the bunker beneath the Senate building. As the drones entered the 20-kilometer red zone around Red Square, sources indicate that the Grom command and control system suffered a catastrophic synchronization error. For 42 minutes, the most powerful man in the East was cut off from his generals. Imagine the dread inside that reinforced concrete vault. Screens flickering, secure lines buzzing with static. Outside, the most advanced stealth fleet in history loitering just hundreds of feet above the rooftops. Rumors are now leaking of a shadow command, a group of mid-level officers who refuse the order to fire back, fearing that any retaliation would trigger a pre-programmed dead-hand drone strike on Moscow's last remaining water filtration plants. This was total paralysis of the will. The Kremlin did not just lose its radar, it lost its mind. In those 42 minutes of total silence, the Russian Empire was not being led by a Tsar. It was a ghost ship, drifting toward a waterfall in the dark. We are now entering the final stage of the 48-hour window. The silent predators are no longer just striking. They are loitering. This is a psychological torture tactic known as persistent presence. By keeping the drones in the air, Ukraine is forcing the Kremlin to keep the city's power grid in a state of manual load shedding, preventing a total surge-induced fire. The forecast for the next 12 hours is grim. As the sun sets on January 10, 2026, the heart of Moscow is beating on an artificial respirator. The Oreshnik missiles fired at Kyiv were a desperate gasp for relevance. The response was a surgical removal of the Kremlin's ability to govern. The question is no longer if the collapse will happen. It is what comes after. When the drones finally descend on the last standing substations, the dark winter of Moscow will begin. This is the moment the map is redrawn. This is the moment the empire realizes it has run out of time. Is this the black swan event that finally breaks the Kremlin's back? Or is the world about to witness an escalation no one is prepared for? The cracks in Moscow's core are now visible for the entire world to see. For updates on what the state is trying to hide from you, subscribe to MrWarfare and stay tuned, because the real story is just beginning to unfold.